The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today we are joined by David Cay Johnston, who should be well known to many of you, and we are extremely excited and delighted to have Professor Johnston here as our guest.
And, so when you're making a comment about your books only selling to 300,000, maybe it's time, hopefully, to go into audiobooks, because people seem to want to do audiobooks more than actually sit down and read something.
Well, we did audio. My book's audio. Yeah. I write nonfiction.
Right.
Nonfiction book sales last year, I've been told, I have not checked this, fell by 2 million volumes. That would be an enormous, enormous decline. Two of my journalist friends, one of whom is a world-famous journalist, have been trying to sell books they've finished, and I've read them, and they are important, brilliant books, and they can't get a publisher. My last book, my publisher turned it down, and I've written nothing but bestsellers for them because they didn't believe anybody would read it. So I've been reworking that book to try and make it publishable. But, Camille Paglia, the Princeton University, I guess her field is art. She wrote a book around 1990 called Sexual Personae, and it was about art in the Western world. And she had an observation in it that I think is highly relevant to America's political culture. She said, traditionally, Western civilization was a mosaic culture, a culture of the text, because of the Old Testament prohibition against graven images. Now, she argues, we have become a pagan culture where movies and films, which are not the same, movies and films, films are highbrow, video games, TV shows, those are images. And I just had a student in my office today, and I asked, when you were in high school, because he's struggling a bit, what books were you assigned to read? Well, we weren't assigned to read any books. You didn't read any books? This is not unusual now in America. I've asked this question of many students going back to 2009. There are schools where you just are assigned, say, the first chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird or some other book. Some students report to me that the teacher shows movies. So if it's To Kill a Mockingbird and each of us read it, our Atticus Finches are different Atticus Finches. But if we see the movie, we get the pre-digested Gregory Peck version. And great as he is as an actor, that's what we get. We don't do any learning about how other people behave, how they think, why they are. And we're seeing in this country a massive disregard for what the sociologists call the other, capital T, capital O. I've been trying, in fact, very hard to get two things into our society, one of which I clearly succeeded with, and that's postings, news stories, commentary on the 54% of Americans read at sixth grade level or below. The other one is to instill the concept of regard. We act with incredible disregard for our fellow human beings. And Donald Trump foments this. Donald is a man, in the 36 years that I've known him, has never shown regard for anyone. Other people, including his own family, are either objects to be used or obstacles to be overcome. But he does not have regard for anyone else. He only has regard for himself.
I'm from Brooklyn, so I'm very familiar with the Trump family because they built a good part of it. The Coney Island
Actually,
area
they didn't build that much of it. They really didn't. Donald and his father were never really big as developers compared to people like the Lafrax and the Resnicks and others.
Well,
But they
Coney Island,
they built a lot of units. They own somewhere north of 10,000 apartments.
there's a place called Trump Village. And full disclosure, I went out with a girl from there when I was in high school. And, it's a big housing development. It's Mitchell-Lama, which I guess you needed political connections to be able to build those. But I knew a bunch of guys when I was in my 20s who were a bit older than I was. And they used to talk all the time about the apartment referral business and what great days those were, the apartment referral business. And it turned out when I talked to them that their job was to keep Black families out of Trump Village and get white families, especially Russian immigrants, into Trump Village. And they got paid by the apartment that they referred to white families. And the whole idea was to keep Black families out. I just have to ask you this question. Have you been on Joe Rogan?
No. I can't imagine him inviting me to be on. I mean, I've been a lot on MSNBC, CNN. I do lots of overseas television these days, far less domestic. I used to do national cable television a couple times a week. I think I've been on cable once in the last 3 months here, but every day I do overseas television.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, we're on a podcast right now, and I don't remember how many hundreds of thousands of people are going to be listening to this. But Joe Rogan has like millions. And I talk to my students. I don't know if you've talked to yours, but my male students, they all watch that podcast. I mean, that is
mine don't. But remember, I'm teaching at a college that's turning out the third largest producer of STEM graduates. So science, technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science. So the social awareness level is much different than when I was at Syracuse.
So the only way that we're going to make a dent in this society is if we start either going on those podcasts and finding that audience and convincing them that we're right, or creating our own, which is a lot more difficult, obviously. Right. And there's no chance that the three of us are going to be doing that. So
no. There's a fascinating article in the New Yorker. I think it was published on November 18th. It's by one of their staff writers, and it's about how the flow of information in America has radically changed. So every significant news executive in America, whether you're in TV, radio, magazines, print, online, the first thing they do in the morning is they look and see what's in the New York Times. Howell Raines, when he was briefly the editor of the paper, said that the New York Times is the daily newsletter of the establishment. It's how they talk to one another. But it turns out that a great deal of information, research is showing, is now flowing from people who just have opinions. We call them influencers. They have no expertise. They have no measured judgment. And it's mostly opinion and a great deal of disregard for hard facts. I can't tell you how many people have said to me in my lifetime, or at least since I joined the New York Times more than 30 years ago, well, it's just all opinions. There's no facts in it. And of course, anybody who reads the paper knows that's utterly ridiculous. It is fact dense beyond belief and very, very expensive facts. When I was at the LA Times writing a feature, not even a hard-hitting news story, it was investigative, but it was a feature. I once spent, in today's money, $25,000 of the company's money on one sentence. An editor wanted it, and I said, it's going to cost you 10 grand in the dollars at the time. And he said, I don't care. Now that's gone. That kind of money isn't around anymore. But I don't think most people have any idea. Journalism is the only business where what you're paid to do is tell the truth as best you can establish it. If your doctor says, well, you got 6 weeks left, David, he's telling you the truth, but that's not his job. His job is to diagnose you and treat you. And Donald has very successfully created a widespread belief that if you're a journalist, you're a paid liar. And I have been on numerous overseas shows with Trump surrogates. who would just blatantly, after I said something, say, well, you can't trust anything that other guy says because he's a paid liar, like all journalists. They just make it up. And I'll come back and say, well, actually, in 36 years, Donald has hired some of the very best litigators in America. I mean, really, really superb lawyers to come after me. And he's never gotten a correction because he's never been able to show any error. In 36 years, in 4 books about him, thousands of articles, never been able to show a single error. And the response I got on a different show when I said that from someone was, well, he just didn't think that was important enough. Yeah, right. That's why he hired a bunch of lawyers to come to the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer and my book publisher to, try to get rid of me. He didn't think it was important.
Yeah. It does go to the credibility of your body of work when somebody with a lot of great litigators can't put a dent in the armor. That really does show much. And to you, Scott, when you were asking, I did actually check it this week. We are up to 739,000 subscribers. So
wow,
we have to go around and do it all. There's no one place to find it anymore, but it is what it is. But
that's still wow.
Yeah, that is wow. And we will continue this interesting conversation with Professor David Cay Johnston in our next episode, and we hope you'll join us. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. IHeart Radio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.